So the eighth picture, the eighth metaphor that we're going to think about is one called Recapitulation, which sounds really a horrible title. It is about representation, that Christ is our representative, taking our place, not quite substitution, but that he is our representative. We're sitting in front of the mural in the church hall that is the Good Samaritan. And we know this story is a call to care for our neighbors. And certainly that is embedded in this parable, because that's how Jesus taught it. It's interesting that Augustine heard this parable as being about salvation. And the poor guy who got beaten up on his way down to Jericho, he sees as humanity. Human beings on their way down to Jericho, on their way down to sin, are caught and beaten up along the way. And the Good Samaritan, Jesus comes and rescues us, offering us freedom from our having been beaten up, freedom from sin. And that, in Augustine's understanding, the Good Samaritan comes to represent us, to take our place in being the one who brings healing to our lives. This idea of being representative, that Christ is our representative who dies on the cross, finds its roots in Romans chapter 5, a passage we've already looked at from a particular perspective of Christus Victor, but this time I want to look at from the perspective of representation. And as I read it, listen for the difference between Adam and the second Adam, between Adam and Jesus Christ. So that Adam stands in for all of humanity, and then Jesus restarts, re-begins this new life. And so, Romans chapter 5 and verse 12. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and this way death came to all people, because all sinned, for before the law was given, sin was in the world. But sin is not taken into account when there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from the time of Adam to Moses, even over those who did not sin by breaking the command, as Adam did. But the gift is not like the trespass. For if the many died by the trespass of one person, how much more did God's grace and gift come by the grace of one man, Jesus Christ, and overflow to the many? So the passage opens by recognizing that death and sin and death have come to our world because of Adam, who represents all of us. We can't blame Adam for this alone. We have all participated in what Adam did. But the grace that Jesus Christ brings begins this new moment, restarts things, and so he becomes the new Adam, starting again. So we continue on, going on verse 16. Again, the gift of God is not like the result of the one person's sin. Judgment followed one sin and brought condemnation, but the gift followed many trespasses and brought justification. So again, that we have been given this new opportunity in Jesus Christ, who becomes our representative, taking our place as representative, modeling for us this new way. And that his death on the cross, this new reality is open to us, that he becomes the one who breaks the new way for us. And so in this representation piece, we have a piece of substitution and also a piece of Christus Victor, married together, brought together into one. So I want to make a concluding comment about the 8 that we have been through. Those of you who have followed along will have recognized that there is blurring and blending between these 8. They don't necessarily each stand completely alone. And so there is something to be gathered and learned from each of them. That we were imprisoned, we were slaves. And the Passover and Exodus image reminds us that we have been brought out of slavery to sin, brought out of the thing that held us captive. In the blood sacrifice, we're reminded that the scapegoat has taken our sins away, and that our sins have been covered by the blood of the Lamb, and that just as the sacrificial system of the Old Testament offers forgiveness, once for all Christ died that we might be forgiven. We've also seen that the ransom redemption model, that we have been bought with a price, that Christ paid the ransom for us to free us. And building on that comes the idea of reconciliation, that we have been made right with God and one another, that our healing of the relationship between ourselves and God is made true in Jesus Christ's death on the cross. We've also looked at Christus Victor, that Christ has risen and is victorious over sin and death, and that his cross, in fact, is his throne where the breaking in of the new world happens, where the apocalyptic realities of the unveiling of God's way has become clear. In the harrowing of hell, the descent into hell, Christ went to the very depths of evil and sin and death, and from there rose victorious by the power of God, breaking the power of sin and death and hell. The understanding of substitution, we come to an understanding that Christ took our place. He is the one who bore the sin for us. And finally, this representative one, we've come to understand that maybe all of them blend together into this picture that Christ is the representative who brings this salvation to the world, that we might be the followers of Jesus Christ, made one with God. Thanks be to God for Christ's death on the cross. Amen.